Thanks everyone for being here. I'm Stephanie. I am a senior solutions engineer with the MTR team. Prior to starting this role on a sales engineer side, how's my screen, Julia?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Prior to starting this role, I was actually in the MTR team, managed threat response as a threat analyst. A little backstory of mine. Before I started with Sophos a few years ago, I was a security analyst and then engineer at a medium-sized company. My role was prioritized to build a SOC, work with the SOC, find a SOC. So I have some experience with this, as well as working with other cybersecurity MTR vendors as well. I want to have a goal set for this call, and my two main goals are just to help everyone understand why you as an MSP would want to perform threat hunting for you and your customers, how to build the SOC, what does that maintaining look like of the security operations center, and just the MTR service at Sophos at a very high level. I'll also discuss where the needs are, why would somebody want to pursue MTR. There'll be some exciting stories in this as well from the rapid response side is our fire department. When your house is on fire and an incident is occurring or there is an active outbreak in your environment, who do you call, right? So that would be the rapid response, and I'll kind of get into that. So first I want to start out with, what does it really look like to build a SOC? So just to give you a story-based timeline, when I was a security engineer and we did our own tabletops, we had our own operations, we had our own SIEM, right? It takes seats and butts. It takes a lot of people, but not only people, it takes the time to build that level set of knowledge and experience, to put in a well-leveled infrastructure to do your 24/7, do your threat monitoring, and anything else that you need. Within people, it's about, different levels of roles inside a SOC. There can be roles and such as, a SOC analyst, which is kind of what I was. The average salary of that, and we're just looking at the national. I just wanted to compile all this data and really look at it. This is something that we've done in the past as a team at old businesses as well. And from you guys being an MSP, this is the numbers that we can show our customers, right? There's going to be different type of SOC levels. I want you to keep in mind here. There's always going to be an entry-level SOC. This is where it might involve some element of a standard security operation. At this standard level or entry level, you have a mix and match of different services, which you're not really unified under a more strategic and process. So this doesn't mean that you might not have that 24/7 visibility. The standard SOC would mean that you're kind of getting into there. At this level, you kind of feel like your head is above water, but you never feel as confident. And then the best in-house SOC is probably what a lot of us would kind of look at, as in Sophos MTR, other vendors as well that are kind of competing within MDR. Within the different roles, we want to break down the SOC analyst, which mean the people that the analyst would be to analyze the detections coming in. What does that look like on a day-to-day with doing the threat hunting? These SOC analysts are getting familiar with your environment from a business context. They're understanding your environment as, what are we securing? What happens on a day-to-day? Is there a developer building software that might not have the best practice of code? This SOC analyst is going to be responsible for compiling all the data, looking at it, breaking down the logs in the SIEM. If they need somebody to have a hand and have some more of a collaboration piece, that's the security operation center manager. On the average of this is about 89,000 a year, 43 an hour. Again, this is national average. This is going to be the person that the SOC analyst averages any collaboration as well. And keep in mind, depending on size, right? You might have multiple SOC analysts making almost 100,000 a year. And this is going to be based on experience, the level of the degree to somewhat certifications as well, depending on what that customer needs. Another role would be an IT director, almost national average of 119, 120,000 a year. This director is going to be solely responsible for most likely building out the team. And this is what my structure kind of looked like previously to Sophos as we built our own SOC. We had the director, we had the manager, and then we had me, the security analyst or security operations center analyst. So in this case, you have the tiers of the roles. And if you're thinking about the math, it's starting to add up. It's starting to add up. Then you have a director of operations. Who's going to maintain this team? How are we going to look at what we need in a way of salary, in a way of continuous training, any certifications as well? Throughout security, and just a little bit of background, I went to IUPUI here in Indianapolis, Indiana. I studied computer information technology with the concentration of information security and software development. Something we always talked about in school was certification. Something we still talk about nowadays in the industry is certifications. How to withhold this to your name, how to add to your career development, but also how do you add to your SOC? As customers look at the threats that are going on in the threat landscape and prioritizing this, especially working with a vendor or another analyst or a SOC, is do you have the certifications? This is going to come up because we want to know, is this something that, is being looked at? How are we going to have budget for this? So this is where industries don't realize that when you're building out the SOC, the Security Operations Center, and you have a director, you have a manager, you have an analyst, they're going to be paid a salary, they're going to want more, but there always is going to be continuous training, not only to compete with their own career development and better themselves, but also to better the SOC, right? The more knowledge they have in all of the industries of different domains of security, it's going to practice how to secure what they use and what they utilize the most. On top of the continuous training and the roles that are built out, it comes down to infrastructure. So on average of a SIEM, a security information event monitoring tool, which is utilized to really compile a lot of the logs. And this could be integrating different logs and detecting things of different softwares that you have in place in your environment, whether that be any softwares that your developers use, any customers that have that high production use case of deploying different things in the cloud, different infrastructures along there, would average to almost 25 to 100,000, depending on a traditional size of business. You're going to need to train your in-house staff of how to use the SIEM, but also how to keep up with everything that the SIEM is using, is changing, is developing. We did have a SIEM at my previous role, and to stay on top of that training was honestly a hassle, right? We're trying to do our day-to-day, we're trying to keep up with everything in-house, and having that SIEM is just tons of logs that if you don't properly set it up, you're going to have to compile a lot of the data and report it to upper management. When also having a SIEM, it comes also down to consistent training, that day-to-day management, but also who is monitoring this after hours? Who is looking at all the logs when we're asleep? How are we going to have a SIEM, but also keep in mind, it's not as useful if we're working on this and we're collecting all these logs and all these detections and we're creating these rules, but at 2 a.m., the SIEM, all it does is come down to notifying us who's going to stop that detection, who's going to stop that brute force from attacking our production server or our web server at 2 a.m. on a Sunday, which is we've seen with the rapid response side, where active incidents will break out, and then implementing the SIEM, right? So it really comes down to how to prioritize this. As we see, it really breaks down to the three things that I said: the time, the infrastructure, and the people. How many seats, how many butts are in those seats? And then it comes down to the budget. It's a lot. It's a lot to build a SIEM, which is why we want to consider looking at possibly an MTR solution. How does it come in-house, right? How does it become a thing? And how did MTR get into with Sophos? So why an MDR? Let's just talk about an MDR in general. A managed detection response solution or service. So we want to really focus on when you're building a SIEM and we're looking at the rules of these detections that we're going through. Every environment is going to be different. There's some environments that, we've seen, especially with MSP, have you created these exclusions for your tools, your RDP tools, your RMM tools? What kind of things are excluded? What kind of things are not patched in your environment? Are you continuously having to look at the scripts that you're running, the code that you're running? Are you allowing these certain things to have your developers use in production servers or in production cases? This is where MDR has a fine line of the differences of the detections. When you're having a SIEM and you're building out the use cases and the logs, we want to not only keep in mind who's looking at it after hours, but are we still practicing what we're creating? It's going to be a lot of noise, right? How do we funnel that out? And I'm just going to break down how we look at any suspicious executable. So right now, the notion of an executable, so our InterceptX Advanced here at Sophos is, we have amazing data science. If you haven't seen an executable, we want to break down how similar does it look to other malware or other benign malware or benign use cases. I'm going to take a step back and kind of level set here. So as I said, so let's just say that we've looked at how to build a SOC, but I want to break down how does it look at with an endpoint protection in place? How does ransomware occur? How do these attacks occur? As we know, like I said, from the rapid response side, and that's our fire department, that is our incident response team here at Sophos. That is a separate service from our MTR, and that is something that we look at for non-Sophos customers, but also primarily non-MTR customers. They might have the endpoint of Sophos InterceptX Advanced in place. If there's anyone from my team listening or on this call, or if you ever speak to them, you know that I've dealt with a lot of MSPs calling about maybe non-Sophos customers mainly, and also some customers that are current Sophos customers of an active incident. And what I've seen a lot from my day-to-day when I get these calls is, oh, it's an MSP calling for a customer that's been hit. What it breaks down to is they have the current protection, but we've seen a threshold of where, this is rising because of not the best practice of exclusions, right? We want to look at how many things have been unpatched for such a long time. Here at Sophos, we set a threshold where we don't convict everything that's suspicious. We'd block a lot of legitimate software from running. So they're going to ask you, how the heck do we do our job if this is being blocked? And this is not only just us, but it's also a lot of other endpoint products that we've seen that has the same problem. There's a threshold also where it looks suspicious where we're blocking it, but it also looks benign, so we won't touch it. How do we explain this? As an endpoint vendor and a security vendor, I want to keep in mind that when we speak to our customers, we want to also speak on, there's things that are going to be not detected. There's going to be things that are suspicious, but our customers need to use it, right? They might say, oh, why does Sophos have a best practice of blocking the PowerShell script from running, or PowerShell? It could be a legitimate tool, but it looks like, we only need it for some time. That's because there's a middle ground where there are some attributes and you need it. Maybe a file modification, any DLL files, a piece of software that is running outside of a different directory, or custom software that might not have the best practice with code. It really falls into place of software will fall into that middle ground. And that is where I prioritize and look at who is looking at this. So to repeat that, the first ground is there's suspicious activity, but we're blocking it, right? There's also a ground where this looks benign in your environment, so we won't touch it. If this is continuously occurring and it may be a false positive, we're not going to touch it. But there's that middle ground where there's some activity that is pivoting off of that suspicious, malicious stuff that we're blocking, but it's pivoting off of creating a file modification, as what we've seen with a lot of ransomware, right? Any DLL files, any piece of software that is running. So what are we doing? Our tools are great. Endpoint protection, our XDR is great with that live response is an example of what you see on the screen. So we provide the tool that you can use to add as an investigative file. Our XDR is our threat hunting tool that we give to you to do it. So you have to break down the attributes, any of the telemetry that you see that's suspicious. How are we conducting the threat hunts? This also comes in line with a SIEM. It all breaks down to the training, the time, the people, and also budget. So we ask ourselves, and we ask our customers, ask them, right? How are you guys going to do this? How are you going to look at that middle ground where your endpoint, whatever vendor you're working with, that from a solely a security perspective, and this is where my huge passion is, right? Is security. That's all I'm focusing on today is we've built the tools, we have the SIEM, we have the tools, but who's looking at the middle ground that needs the threat hunting? If we have the tools to use it, do you have enough butts in the seat to do it, right? If I'm not running these threat hunts 24/7, and I'm mentioning not during normal business hours where it's 3 a.m. and where our customers are likely to be hit. I remember working July 4th weekend, and I believe this is where Kaseya or Hafnium occurred. One of those attacks, but when it occurs, it's scary. It comes down to the level of that middle ground protection, that actionable item of diving into the attributes of let's do an in-depth hunt of the activity that's going on. This is where we want to share it with people who have to look at the suspicious stuff. So you're going to need eyes on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We want to ask our customers, your customers as an MSP, how do you look at these suspicious files a day? Who do you want to monitor it for? You have to ask yourself that, as well as asking from your own perspective. When I worked as a security engineer with our own SOC and working within another vendor for a SIEM, I was on call 24/7. I did not like that. I did not like to be that point of contact when an outbreak would occur at 2 a.m. It's almost like I couldn't live my life, right? I had to continuously be glued to my phone. I had to say, oh, actually, we're running some tests. That's a false positive, right? Why should I be telling the SIEM or an MDR, a very low leveled MDR, of how to do it? The response mode was not in-house there. Something I've kind of briefly talked about is these protections being disabled, any exclusions, right? One of the challenges I think we see, especially from coming from the rapid response house and speaking with a lot of our MSPs today and a lot of our MSP customers, is the obviously use cases of an RMM or PSA tools that rely on the same administrative tools. If you have the exclusions in place, like I said before, that are legitimate tools, but keep in mind that a lot of these legitimate tools could be utilized and taken advantage from an adversary. Things like PS exec, PS kill, things that you have to use in place, remote management tools, RDP, TeamViewer. Those are all great, but bear in mind, adversaries love to use those tools. I can't tell you guys or stress this enough of how many calls that our team would take. And the first thing we want to say is, hey, let's look at your protection. Whatever vendor you're using, you guys have a great vendor, right? You have that great protection, but who's monitoring this? Who is being consistent with enabling these? You have to keep up also with us and about how much telemetry we're adding more and more. This could be a slip up and have an exclusion that you only meant to have temporary. Oh, I needed to run this tool, so I'm just going to exclude it for the day. A day comes into weeks, into months, and then years, and we look in the environments, and it hasn't been touched since 2019 or 2020, and it's like, whoa, it's like a mini heart attack, right? We see this a lot with MSPs that come to rapid response, where the attacker does not care. It comes down to they don't care what you're using. They don't care that, you have the settings in place, but if we can bypass that because you have some things that are excluded, which means, hey, that I'm paying for this security solution and safe, but I don't want you guys to look at it when we're running this. That's where they don't care. Whereas Sophos MTR, we're going to be running that 24 threat hunting. We're going to ask the really broad questions. Whether these exclusions or practices are in place, we're going to say, show me all your network trafficking not running over port 40, not over 883 over the last 10 minutes. It comes down to, we might see an example in their infrastructure of port 3889, right? RDP, 3889 itself. It's a legitimate tool, and it's going to be a lot of traffic, a lot of practice here of why we shouldn't use it or block it. And that is because if RDP is not as successful and secured and exploited by adversaries to get an initial foothold into the environment, not only will Sophos MTR team ask, but we're going to look for other anomalies of how they got in. This is where our telemetry within our MTR is built every few minutes, maybe once every day, or even 24 to 72 hours. We're going to ingest a lot of that data. We're going to look for any positive results, run it through a series of rules and models. When you're looking at an endpoint of other vendors or just that basic endpoint protection, that's a lot of machine learning and AI, and how it's built through the backend, right? It's really funneling through the AI team, the machine learning, and saying, how do we look at this? What is it bypassing? But again, there's that middle ground, and you need to see through that back end, the series of rules and models. When it does match the rule or model that does become malicious or suspicious enough, it's going to drop in a queue for a human element. Therefore, in what we call it, it becomes a case. Our analysts might say, how do we follow up with the question? What source IP are we using? Where does it come from? Russia, China, Mexico, right? We're going to ask our users, who's leveraging it? These are the questions that I wished as a security engineer, having the own SOC and security level in place, is who's looking at that middle ground. I don't want to just ask the very basic questions of, do you have that in place? Are we allowing that log? How do we create a new rule? Creating new rules, becoming a lot of the traffic that is occurring with the SIEM is, we're going to bypass a lot of this telemetry and what is needed in today's security. Not only with today's security, but the in-house of the SOC and how to practice this. So the best practices and what we see is, keep in touch with your exclusions. Remember that you're putting these in, remembering that you have to patch these servers in place. And that just becomes a lot of the day-to-day task, and it comes down to the same three things: the time, the people, and the infrastructure. When we ask these follow-up questions, we're only just saving them from the next level attacks that are occurring. If most of us don't remember what happened, right, we're Kaseya, the VSA ransomware attack. So I'm just going to highlight some of what we've seen here at Sophos with the deeper dive of Kaseya and how to get any practical advice on how to defend from the main thing is the supply chain attack. And if you've missed this story and you haven't been watching the news or seeing this in our Twitter feed, it was the weekend that I was on call. It was that July 5th, July 4th weekend where everyone was out on vacation, or trying to enjoy where they saw the most level of attack, right? There has been a worldwide supply chain attack that's really impacted a lot of MSPs and their customers, all through software created by a Florida-based company called Kaseya. When we think about customers out there as well as just having a SIEM and having their own SOC, this becomes risky, is because when we take a look at the middle ground of the start of the attack, how did this occur in the environment? You know, finally, there's that agent exe started by Kaseya, the agent mon exe process, and the actual dropping of where that ransomware begins. It's inheriting its system level privilege. So even that baseline privilege is being bypassed and some type of compromise level will occur. You know, it really breaks down to a random delay. It's disabling that core malware and anti-ransomware protection that was offered by that Microsoft Defender. We look at how it really began, and I mentioned the agent exe. Why I'm mentioning this is if we look at and we think of when our customers do have a SIEM or vary that level of their own SOC, we're creating the rules. We're bypassing a lot of the logs. We might get a log for, hey, there's 2 files that were dropped in the environment. What do these DLLs mean? What are they doing? What is it dropping? We might see from a human eye that it's not malware, right? If our staff isn't up to date with the training, if they're not even aware of Kaseya occurring and how vulnerable it is, then we don't know what's going to happen next, right? I always say that, you know, with security, we don't want to say when this occurs, when it all happens. We want to say if it happens, this is what we're going to do. So from Kaseya, we've seen that this version of the MSPM eng.exe is vulnerable to side-loading attacks. And we've seen this particular version of attacks abused before. In the side-load attack, malicious code is actually put into a dynamic link library, that DLL, named to match one required by the attack executable and usually placed in the same folder as an executable, so it's found before a legitimate copy. So remember what we said about the tools, some of these tools being legitimate. Who is looking at that middle ground? After it's dropped as an executable, what is it executing? Has this happened before? What does that cyber kill chain look like? What happens before it actually becomes ransomware, right? Before we have the scary screen that almost just makes you call someone. From the rapid response side, and what this looks like, if you're wondering, the process is usually they call us. Usually this you know, this happens and they call us right away. Our team is 24/7. I don't have to be here 24/7, but most of our team is 24/7. Thankfully, we have the team of our incident responders. And when we've seen this, some of them are working with, for non-Sophos customers, some of them are having their own SOC, their own team. And usually I'll get on a call. You know, I want to understand first, who's everyone on the call, right? Let's understand. I have the director, I have the CEO, I have the security analyst, I have the security help desk, I have IT on the phone. They don't know how they got to this point. They don't know their own practices in place and how they got there. These images are not things that you want to see. And this is the discussion when we're on the phone. We don't want to talk about these things. If you see them, it means it's too late and that the ransomware attack has already been successfully executed and your files are now encrypted, or let's say some of them in this case. When the attack was complete and is complete, the first noticeable change is that the Windows desktop is changed. It instructs the user to find a file and follow the instructions. So when you're opening the file, and hopefully none of you know about this or have been in this situation because it's really scary. It's almost like the nightmare that you never want to live. I was on another webinar and I told some of the people on my team too, is that I dream about these things, and it's crazy because I had a dream where we're all sitting in the Dallas office, and let's say our director is presenting, and boom, Sophos gets hit with ransomware, right? What do we do? It's scary, and I woke up like, oh gosh, what are our security practices in place? It always makes me realize that there's somebody out there that's always going through this, and when I get on these calls from a rapid response side, I show empathy. I talk to them about, first, let's look at what security posture you have in place, whether it be your own SOC, whether that be a very low level ingested SIEM, you're just wanting to collect logs, and you want to look at what you have in place. You want to look at what your team is doing. You want to look at how much of your software that you have in place is being tested. But then it breaks down to that screen where I showed you the policies and exclusions in place. You guys would be surprised how many companies will allow these certain tools or softwares or RDP open to the internet to run for so long. When the user realizes that they've already dreaded this, their files are encrypted. And then it provides them of, hey, contact us and pay your ransom and go to this website. It's scary. So interestingly, as well as offering $45,000 for individual systems, with Kaseya, we've seen that, also offering 70 million for a universal decryptor. Who do they think they would pay? Kaseya, a US Gov, perhaps maybe just a headline grabber. So it's scary when we've seen that even on the front line, as we say in our team, is being a first responder, responding to these scary times of any customer having ransomware. Any customer, even pre-ransomware, how did it occur in their environment? What are we looking at in place? And we get on to, I've even gotten calls where I'll see that, the team is just upset at that one person monitoring their SIM. Who's monitoring it, but why aren't you taking action? And this is a very stressful situation to be in. As an MSP and what you have to practice, right? When we speak to our customers, we don't just want to say, how are you allowing this? How are you looking at your tools and what's being monitored for 24/7? Who's notifying you of going through these detections and prior or pre-ransomware? It comes back to the middle ground, and I know I'm saying this a lot, but I can't stress this enough of, you're not only looking at this and notifying your customer of what's happening, but why an MDR is very important when you're looking at MDR is, how are you taking action? Forget the suspicious stuff, forget that being blocked by AI and ML. Who's looking at this adversary in my environment for months or even, years? How have they been executing and dropping these files that might become some type of payload ransomware? Who is taking the action? Interestingly enough, how did it become ransomware when I have this level of security and posture? I have this many people in-house. It all breaks down to visibility as well. Going back to the after hours of taking action. Customers do not only want to be notified, but they want to say, look, it's expensive. It takes time. It's going to take a lot of training for somebody to fully understand how to handle a SIM, how to stay abrupt with the training, how to hire, right? I'm in my 20s and my younger 20s, and I always get asked, how do I stay on top of learning, right? I'm thankful enough to have a team at Sophos that even prior on the MTR team as a SOC is we're pushing, we're all very passionate about what we do is because we have a huge team of flexibility of that learning motivation, of the dedication of, let's get our own certification. Let's look at this. Oh, did you guys hear about this? Look at our customer going through this. Let's run a threat hunt together just because we want to see what's going on. This was something that I think people don't talk about is when you have a smaller team, when you have somebody who is monitoring a 200 seat customer and they're going through thousands of logs a day and figuring out how to read through these logs and just you just get so bombarded with a lot of information that you lose a lot of the passion that you have, and you can't conduct a lot of the threat hunts that we see today because you don't have the team. You don't have the team, you don't have the people. Even upper management is just trying to keep they're trying to keep their numbers together, their customers, their vendors that they have in place, the protection they have in place. Our job as a security engineer or having a SIEM is maintaining it. How do I maintain the security posture before it comes pre-ransomware? You have to keep trained, you have to keep skills, you have to keep that knowledge in-house, but always comes down to the passion and the collaboration piece. And that's going to be very hard to find. And that comes with keeping people on a SOC and not letting them get burnt out with a lot of the telemetry and the logs that they're seeing. They want to practice of where do we see that in place. Another one I want to really speak on is, after the Kaseya, it really led to this attack was actually with REvil ransomware. So REvil is I think they've got taken down recently, but it was a widely used ransomware as a service, which offered, and it was an offering that, was around since 2019. Criminals lead this REvil ransomware as a developers. Like I said, developers creating their own software, having their own tools and their resources for targeting and implementation. Differentiators to other REvil attacks is adversaries learned and leverage what appears to be a zero-day exploit to gain access to issue commands and send code to victims. It was a very customized attack, meaning that REvil actors had access to VSA server instances and were able to identify individual customers of MSPs as being different from larger organizations. A lot of the targets that adversaries create, and if you're following security on Twitter, is let's look at who our customers are under MSPs. Isn't that smart? Oh, some of these MSPs actually highlight who their customers are. So we want to take a step back. How do we practice that base level security? How do we say, this is how we're being protected? It's a very customized attack. And again, you need that next level MTR solution to have that hands-on protection for the next level landscapes of threat landscape. Always changing, always developing. The volume shadow copies was another one. It was a behavior common among ransomware that triggers many malware defenses. So the takeaway here is that adversaries are constantly exploring and exploiting new avenues of attack. It is a multi-million-dollar business and they're still not sitting still, which is scary because when, we're looking at MTR and the telemetry that we have through Sophos Labs, our data scientists and data researchers that are amazing, and they're saying, hey, let's send this to AI and then our MTR team will look at it. This is a lot of, where we see this telemetry and how do we do it in-house. We're looking at the pyramid of pain, that easy stuff at the bottom, from the domain levels, from the hashes. How does it compare to the AI of the tough things? With Sophos MTR, we're leveraging actually and detecting these things. What tools and tactics are being used? How are we relating that to the MITRE ATT&CK framework as well? Where do we see ourselves during a supply chain attack? I'm briefly going to go over how do we let our customers from an MSP and vendor is how do we defend against these supply chain attacks? So this is another huge growing vector of attack. As you know of today, organizations are more connected as they take advantage of remote connectivity technology. We break down the numbers that a lot of decision making reveals that they've outsourced their team, right? They're using MSPs, they're allowing remote tools to be used. Adversaries need to find ways around cyber defenses. Our cybersecurity awareness has increased hugely over the last few years, especially after becoming a professional in the field and studying cybersecurity. I've never seen it become such a trend, right? What else are we seeing? The cyber Ukraine Russia attack. It's insane to see cyber crisis on the news today. That only just shows that how do we defend against all the bad stuff going on in the world? Given the complexity and the nature of a supply chain attack, technology alone can't prevent them. When I speak of endpoint, right, AI, ML, we cannot prevent it just through that. We want to shift from a reactive to a more proactive approach. We want to continuously monitor for early signs of compromise. The main thing is that there are many approaches to making this approach, and one popular approach for a large service provider, cloud operators and payments is continue assessing security posture. Continue having protection that will always review your security posture, that is going to be continuously monitoring, right? You can't assume when it happens or, if it happens, this is going to occur. We want to say when it does occur, let's be ready. Let's have the team that's going to be running the 24/7 level threat hunting. We want to have the team that is already outsourcing with their skills and level of expertise. We want to say, don't assume you're not important to be targeted, right? How many of your customers say, I only have 10 seats and I'm only running 2 servers and about a few endpoints, right? Your posture of the suppliers is actually critical in safeguarding against supply chain attacks. So don't neglect, let's tell them, don't neglect your own cybersecurity hygiene. A lot of organizations will say that they don't even know where to start, or they believe that they were never important enough. I even have friends say, how do we practice our social media from getting breached or attacked? How about my bank account? I don't have that much money. Why would they look at me? Your cybersecurity practices could mean the difference between a very mild inconvenience and a catastrophic incident, right? It could mean that your whole life could be taken advantage just through one password that you're having all over your platform. This is where I say, keep in mind an MTR solution, an MDR solution in-house. Besides a SIEM, we want to have the practice of enabling an MTR team. Sophos Managed Threat Response has really been born and acquired from Rook Security that was here in Indianapolis, Indiana. It was really focused on them being very proactive with an MDR and having their own levels of tool sets and having the level of expertise there. I break down what is MTR. With Sophos MTR, and I'm saying this from a very high level overview, is that it is a response service. It is our own threat response service. It's going to include some of the key aspects of lead-driven threat hunting, lead list threat hunting, proactive posture improvement, This is where we're lacking this in a SIEM, is the threat hunt piece. The differences of the lead-driven and leadless is we want to involve the machine learning process of identifying any weaker signals in the estate. That's that lead-driven. Once intercept X, that endpoint protection or server protection does block the malware that's confirmed, whether that be a strong signal, it's going to lead to a hunt that is a casual or adjacent activity, leading to new indicators of compromise that we probably won't see. Some of these queries are running every 20 seconds. That's the lead driven. When I explain the lead driven, we have a huge element missing. And that's something that I've set out through the whole presentation is a human. The leadless threat hunting is going to involve the human proactive sweep of infrastructure to seek out and identify any emerging threat activity or trend. I mentioned Kaseya, Hafnia, REvil ransomware, other signs of attacks, maybe the Russian and Ukraine crisis, right? This is where the leadless threat hunting approach is doing that. The human elements in what the leadless hunt approach is that these are hunts executed, looking for anything that has yet to be identified by the estate by machine-driven engines. So this allows a human-based threat hunting for the middle ground, the unknown. On top of the threat hunting, a key element is our proactive posture improvement. What security postures do you have in place? We're not just working as a SOC for our customers or your customers or you. We're saying, hey, let's talk. Let's have a more proactive approach. We're not working for you, we're working with you. Any threats conducted by the ops team, if we determine or find any gaps in your coverage that may be addressed, like things like port 3889, any RDP sessions on the machines, any unprotected any unprotected devices in the network, we're going to question that. That's where we focus on a very swept posture improvement of the customer and what they're doing. Why is this port open, right? When we have the detections and our way that we practice saying the cases is, it breaks down to we're looking at the middle ground. We're notifying you, but most importantly, we're doing a very response approach of we're having the in-house hands-on remediation of we're looking at it, we're doing it, we're taking action. We're also customizing how our MTR customers want to work with us. And this is something that we don't look at whether they choose the standard or advanced offering. We look at the decision of how do they want to be notified, but how do they want to work with us, right? When we look at a SIEM and we look at the security operations center team in-house, they say, I'm tired of working the weeknights. I'm tired of working holidays. I'm tired of looking through these logs over and over when I have no idea how to conduct a threat hunt. And they say, well, let's just work with you and your team first. Let's start out with there's some brute force activity. That port 3889, that RDP session actually needs to be open. Let's collaborate. Let's say I'm reaching out from behalf of the SOC. I want to ask you the very broad questions of why, what are you using? What did your developers build in your team? Why are you guys utilizing this code? This is not the best practice. We're going to collaborate and work alongside them. If it's 2 in the morning and we see that that developer tool is being used and it's being exfiltrated or data is being sent out that's very malicious and leads to any IOC, that's not authorized. We're going to be taking full-on, hands-on remediation and how we practice things of our response actions. We're going to isolate any host, block any files, run any scans. And this is all on behalf of collaborating or authorizing. And then we have the best case scenario of these aren't as successful. Let's run a use case of using a live terminal, using a command line interface of direct access to the host. Does not show on the host. There's no other additional installments or any other tools being deployed, right? It's all seamlessly through the agent. So all throughout the Sophos agent is where a lot of these response actions can be built. They're also going to have Excel reporting of weekly and monthly. We're going to compile. We're not just looking at false positive. We're not just looking at the suspicious items, but when it does become a case and a human is looking at that middle ground, what are we looking at? How many detections has occurred on this targeted user? Why is this going on with this continuous user, right? We're attaching every case to the minor attack framework, the cyber kill chain. We look at every case activity trail, what's going on, who's working at it as well. And then we compile a weekly and a monthly that can be automated. I'm coming to an end here. I'm keeping mind of everyone's time, and I want to make sure that I wrap up. I tend to go long. So this is our contact, right? You guys want to contact us at any time. You have the East MSP team at all hands on deck. Also, 24/7 is that rapid response for also non-Sophos customers, non-MTR customers, that rapid response at sophos.com. Julia, I'm going to pause here. Do I need to address any questions or concerns?
Yeah, we actually just have a few questions. So I'll start with the first one that we just received. So where is the MTR team located, and how can partners resell the services?
Yeah, so a lot of our MTR team is located in different security operations centers around the world. Majority is here in Indianapolis, and then we have a lot in the UK as well as India. Another question is, how do we have that? We kind of follow the model of follow the sun. So wherever that is looking at of our SOC, that is where our customers align with the time zone, that's where we can have that. And I think you said, how can they resell the services? So get with our account team, right? Get with our MSP team at Sophos. We talk about how to sell it. Get on calls with us. Our team is amazing. We're a bunch of our sales engineers on the MTR sales desk are passionate about speaking about the MTR, so we can run the demos at any time. Include us in any of the monthly calls. Send them this recording as well, and we can start the conversation there.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that, the East MSP team, we can help you, with any questions regarding reselling the MTR solution as an MSP. So be sure to loop us in specifically on any opportunities you have, and we can help facilitate that for you. And then we've got another one that just came in. Can we offer MTR services to customers that do not use Sophos firewalls? And how would using a Sophos firewall better the service or protection to customers?
Good question. Okay, so short answer is yes. Any customers that do not utilize our firewall, we do have other MTR connectors, such as a network sensor as well, that would essentially sit on as a virtual appliance or in listening mode. We also do have exciting news that Sophos has acquired SOC OS. That is another third-party integration where we're going to be having a lot more telemetry that we're missing with the threat landscape, with that visibility on non-Sophos firewalls or any non-Sophos infrastructure, email protection, even cloud as well. But having the Sophos firewall, as you guys know, having that MTR enabled on that firewall, it will send a lot of more detections and threat hunting capabilities to our MTR team, ingesting those ATP events, those IDS events, and having our team solely focused on, if anything does occur, we have the hands-on remediation of jumping to that and pivoting off of that telemetry to the Sophos firewall, versus if it was not, we couldn't utilize it there. But exciting news with the SOC OS and other integrations that we have that Sophos is acquiring. It does enable us to focus on also ingesting that telemetry with third-party software.
So, and we've got another one. So what is the best way as an MSP to show the value of MTR to a customer?
Yeah, good question. And I think this is where Julia can agree is doing things like this, right? Having the webinar, having the discussions of a lot of the questions I kind of said throughout is, how are you monitoring these type of files or modifications in your environment? I think the best way is to also check on our customers and show the expertise of an MDR solution, and why the threat landscape would need it is looking at the trends that we see today, the use cases of the best practices, and how do we come in place with Sophos. Having the discussion would be the best way as well.
And I think to add to that too is the human portion of the threat hunting and detection that Sophos MTR does provide. That's a huge value, especially to managed service providers. So that's one thing to also keep in mind as well. And then we've got one more. It's more of a technical question. And it says, how would we enable MTR on a Sophos firewall? Does it require a component outside of the firewall appliance?
Yeah, so with the MTR visibility, we have the MTR connectors, and I can also kind of send out some follow-up data sheets with this, right? But with the Sophos firewall connector, it will essentially have the connector that's on there. And what that looks like of installing is simply upgrading your licensing, but enable the MTR team to have access to the network and endpoint telemetry along there. So if it is an MTR, or sorry, if it is a Sophos firewall, we'll essentially just enable the agent that is running the network data that we'll receive along there will be any sessions, any DNS logs, any firewall logs along there. And then I can always follow up with how we do that. We have amazing documentation on enabling MTR on a firewall as well. So I can share that with the PowerPoint, Julia.
And then there's just one more, and it's how long would an initial setup be to activate the MTR service?
Yeah, so for existing Sophos customers, let's say they already have the protection in place, it essentially is almost like flipping a light switch, right? You're just going to enable the MTR team to have a lot of the data like that we already have within Central, and it starts getting ingested within MTR. After onboarding MTR, you do have an official kickoff call for advanced customers only with the MTR SOC team. So we're going to sit down, do a security health check, look at their postures in place, and talk about the MTR team, kind of what I did today, explain the service, talk about the response modes, but do a technical sit down of your security posture and the best way of MTR to have the most visibility with that.